Hey everyone, welcome to our video about different types of natural resources. We're going to talk about some different resources like land, forest, fishery, air, and freshwater. And we're going to talk about some of the threats to those resources and what we're doing about those threats to those resources. First, let's talk about land. Land is a resource that is used for many different things, whether it's finding shelter, building homes, having crops, anything like that. And there are several big threats to it currently. One big threat is soil erosion. So you can see here, there is water erosion all the way from the hill all the way down, and that is taking away the land and eroding it down into a riverway where it's going to be, brought further downstream. But in order to kind of help prevent some of that soil erosion, you could plow on a slope or even leave the stems and roots of previous crops to help hold the soil in place. Desertification is another type of threat to our land resource. So, desertification is basically the land turns into a desert. We've depleted all the nutrients in that certain area, and we've left it basically as a desert. If we leave things like stems and roots from previous crops, not only could we help with soil erosion, but we could also leave that nutrients to be decayed by things like fungus and given back to that land so that it doesn't end up in a desert state. Next resource is the forest resource. So, forests are really important because they store all types of nutrients through the photosynthesis process. They remove carbon dioxide, they produce oxygen, they help moderate our climate through things like transpiration or the evaporation of water through leaves. They help limit soil erosion because of all the large tree roots, and they protect fresh water from soil erosion. Currently, the biggest threat to the forest is deforestation. It's humans cutting down the forest or burning the forest to make way for crops. And that's a pretty serious threat. You've heard about the wildfires around the Amazon and in Australia recently that are human caused. And that's really threatening this forest resource. So, we have a couple different solutions. We can do things like planting trees or only harvesting the very most mature trees that are kind of done growing, and not only would that be good because it would give us the resources we need, but it would also make room for some of the younger trees to grow up and mature without being cut down initially. So, we definitely want to try to start protecting our forest resource better because you can see how many different ways that impacts our biosphere. Next up, we have the fishery. So, fisheries are basically places where we can go and fish for food sources of different species of fish. And one big fishery is the Chesapeake Bay, which is the main watershed for the state of Virginia. And they supply a huge amount of food, whether it's crabs or fish. But there's a huge threat going on right now. People tend to overfish. We take more than we need or more than we can use from a given area, and those fish are no longer able to reproduce and make more fish in that area for us to come back and fish again later. We've taken too much, and so we've depleted that population and caused actually a bottleneck effect for many of the species. But there are many ways that we can prevent this overfishing and depletion of our fishery resource. One way is fishing restrictions, but those can be kind of hard to enforce. You have to have a lot of policing of the water if you're going to enforce fishing restrictions. But one really great way to help with this fishery issue is aquaculture. Aquaculture is growing fish. It's basically fish farming. So you would have many different pools, and you're growing trout or other fish species like salmon from a young age. And as they mature, you put them into a different pool and they become adult fish, which then you can sell at a market without having to fish them out of nature and without disrupting the food web in nature. Next up, we have the air as a natural resource. And air is a huge natural resource because it contains the gases that we need in order to survive, mainly oxygen, but also through the nitrogen cycle, there's nitrogen in the air, and carbon dioxide is in the air, which gets cycled for photosynthesis. And things like water exist as water vapor and condensation in the air. And the air is threatened very severely right now by pollutants that come from our industrial revolution. So, industry releases a lot of gases into the air that probably shouldn't be there, like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and carbon dioxide. And those gases get carried up into the clouds and they react with water droplets where they form acid rain. Now, acid rain not only impacts the air, but it also then falls onto the earth and impacts the land and organisms that live on the land. So, something that we can do, or that we even have been doing, is limiting emissions from cars and factory smokestacks. So, we've installed different filters and come up with more sustainable ways to do our farming that, or do our industry and movement of farming crops through trucks and things like that. And we've actually started to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, or our things like carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide. You can see that we were in a pretty bad place in the early 90s. We were releasing a lot of different greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But because we started realizing what we were doing and we started having laws that limited the pollutants that could be released into the air, we've actually decreased our greenhouse gas emissions to a fairly low level by 2016, compared to back in 1992. And that's a pretty significant change. So hopefully, we're starting to undo some of the damage that we've done to our earth by releasing pollutants into our air resource. Next, we have fresh water. Now, fresh water is a huge resource. Of course, we know that water is very important for life. We've talked about that when we talked about properties of water, but unfortunately, we don't always treat our waterways the right way. If you've gone outside and you've gone to the greenway, chances are you've seen something like this, where you've seen some trash in the waterway. And that's really not okay. Not only could that be sewage, like human waste, that could be plastics and trash like that, but there could also be chemicals being released into the waterway that can damage our ecosystem. Now, a big way that we can protect our freshwater resources are, well, we could stop doing this in the first place. We could clean this up. But we can also have protected areas like swamplands, and we can conserve water whenever possible, like stop using our freshwater resource as much. If you're brushing your teeth, turn the water off while you brush, and then turn it back on to rinse and spit. That sort of thing. Taking the time to clean up and protect our waterways and then reduce the use of freshwater resources can help protect that natural resource. Thank you so much for listening.